Hey, we've been having a wonderful discussion, but I wanted to just jump in with the point about an ideology being successful. So I feel like early Christianity and the early Gnostics, the Manichaeans, they didn't believe that the world was a good enough place. Like, so having kids wasn't important. But eventually, there's no future, right? If everyone's just willing to die, and then there's no more people propagating, it becomes also monastic. But monasticism and the monks were very important to early Christianity, but eventually it became supplanted by like the institutional church. But I feel there was a decision made at some point that okay, well, we're not going to emphasize the part where we don't have any kids. We're going to emphasize the part where you have a lot of kids, and you do that for God.
Right. I think this has to do with, well, an ideology can be transmitted in one of two ways, right? It can be transmitted, I guess you could say, vertically or horizontally, right? And I think it's pretty clear that Christianity started out as being a horizontally transmitted mimetic system, like an ideology that you needed to find converts for. And well, but that's the thing, right? If you have like 1,000 converts, 1,000 Christian, from the second generation on, if those converts transmit that ideology to their kids, then it progressively starts to mutate and to become a more vertically transmittable ideology, right? So, for instance, if one of them emphasizes the monastic lifestyle and as a consequence goes to a monastery and lives his life in prayer and contemplation there, and then another one emphasizes a bit more family making, and this guy just has a regular family and a wholesome life and a couple of kids and all. Well, then if you take those two guys, in the next generation, the kids will have grown up in a in a kind of Christianity that emphasizes a bit more family making than the monastic lifestyle, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I should have started out with two, and then say that the monastic guy didn't have any kids, and the family guy had two kids, and then in the next generation you have two Christians, and they grew up in a version of Christianity that has equal emphasis on, say, family making and monastic lifestyle. But then there will be a difference in the life choices of those two kids, and one of them might have one kid, and another one of them might think, if I want Christianity to be successful, I better have four. Right? And seamless as the religion that started out as a fashion, almost as a horizontally transmitted mimetic system, seamlessly as it is vertically transmitted, it will acquire the characteristics that make it better at being transmitted vertically. And is that a train? Yeah, okay. And lose the characteristic that make it, well, maybe not lose the characteristic that make it persuasive and actively dedicate your life to looking for converts, but definitely put less emphasis on those. So I think Christianity probably started that way. And
yeah.
are you still there?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Did you want to add anything to the freedom of speech thing, or did you? You asked me earlier what I believe the limits of to the freedom of speech were. And I told you I think like U.S. Supreme Court precedent is a pretty good guideline. Like you can't yell fire in a movie theater. And
Right.
you said that well you said actually that you think that it should be like respectful speech is protected, but like abusive speech maybe. And you know, like I think I was gonna say after a lot of reading in philosophy, you know, the philosopher Plato said that legends like heroes they should not be portrayed in like a negative like you shouldn't show Odysseus doing like a thief, you know, what a thief would do. And the reason is because like children might hear this and they might think that like, well, you know, if Odysseus does it or Captain America does it, then it would be right, you know, to lie or cheat or steal or whatever they do. And so it's very important to make sure the legends don't have bad lessons in them. And frankly, I've come down like, I mean, for example, in terms of any kind of religious speech that could incite hatred, I think there should be like legislation against that. So I think because we've seen there's consequences. For example, like damaging speech leads to damaging consequences. So anyway, I mean, it's very hard to police, but I think that again, like having read what I've read over the years and in philosophy, I think like, you know, Plato was very well, you know, like basically, look, when you tell a story or when you tell a narrative event, you should be drawing the right lessons from it. You should not be drawing incorrect lessons, even if like Homer wrote down whatever he wrote down. So,
Right.
um, but it's interesting. Like basically, what I would be doing, like an FCC, making sure Captain America is not smoking cigarettes. Like I guess I don't know. Like it's
Right.
so like I mean I can just propose and like again I'm glad I'm not like it's a very and imagine so I'm reading about the U.S. Um, Senate. This Robert Caro, he there's a 3 volume biography of Lyndon Johnson. And what's the amazing thing about him is he was leader of the House of Representatives, which is the representative chamber, and then the elite chamber, like the Lords, is the Senate. And so the upper chamber, and so the he was leader of both, and like being a Southern senator, he voted against the Civil Rights Bill, you know, that like basically gave federal protections to people who were victims of racial violence in the South,
Right.
stuff. So, but by the time like he became president after Kennedy's assassination, he passed the Civil Rights Bill. So it just shows how like and also his experience from being like a ruler of both houses basically, and also how legislation is made and passed, you know, and who owes who and what, you know. Um, he was able to get immense things done through a system that's like notoriously like a there's a wrench like
Resilient to
anyone,
change.
yeah, exactly, anyone can throw a wrench into the machinery, you know, it seems like in the Senate certainly with a filibuster. So yeah. So but the thing is though, it's very funny though, but it's like you have to the amount of experience in the rare person, and also but the whole reason these 3 volumes are written is because he's able to break the ice, you know, that all the southern states had formed. And one of the things like the rural states, they had produced, you know, one of the things in both houses, but certainly the Senate, is that seniority gave you more leadership and committee assignments. So because the southern states had less rotation, they produced great orators and they produced longevity, and that longevity gave them
Had
seniority.
weights.
Right,
Hmm.
exactly. And so because of that, you know, you're able to control which bills get to the floor and things like that. So like the way power is used is very important. and unfortunately, like, poor people don't understand. Like, I mean, it's I'll just be candid with you. Like, I mean, at my work, they have custodial staff that are often people who are completed their uh, prison sentence, and then they're paid to clean the restrooms and the facilities and stuff, but it gives them enough money to afford like a good car and a good phone, so they don't have to like resort to a life of crime. So you kind of want that. But I was telling somebody about the Senate, and like he was kind of zoning me out, even though we were talking for like more than a year about religion, race, politics, the society, and how things are rigged, often like institutionally rigged against people sometimes. So he wasn't able to concentrate on what I was saying about the Senate, about like how it is the exactly how, like you said, resilient to change. It is the institution that makes the entire machinery most resilient to change. Um, so anyway, like, I mean, in other words, poor people, they're just not interested in like the mechanisms of power over them. Um, it's not their fault, but it's like they think they don't just they I guess they just feel disconnected from it, like they don't have access to it. But
I find a general lack of interest for abstractions, and well, the idea of the Senate as this machinery, as you put it, is somewhat abstract. Like, it's detached from our daily lives.
it's
I don't know.
true.
I have
It's true.
a co-worker who is well, it's going to need a tiny bit of background, but
Sure.
we had a law, and we have a law in France that if you're going to rack up debt to buy a house, for instance, your monthly installments can't be higher than 33% of your revenue, right? Which is a good law, I would think, because
Right.
it prevents people
Responsible.
from being over indebted, and also prevents people from hoarding houses they don't need, which
Right.
is also just as important.
Right.
But there was a bit of a loophole in this until very recently, which was that if you bought a house and then rented it out to someone else, a house or a flat, then the rental revenues that you got from it were added uh, to your revenue, right? To your
Income.
wages, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
to your income, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And but the mode of calculation changed, as in it would still be 33% of your regular income, and then you would take into account 75% of your rental income.
Oh.
And so if you managed to, say, buy a
Yeah.
flat and then renovate it, and rent it
Get a
out at
decent
a
revenue from it. Mm-hmm.
rent it out at a premium, you could
Mm-hmm.
get enough that you would still be able to buy another one without
Mm-hmm.
any problem,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a loophole that stayed into place for like 20 or 30 years, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And we made a lot of millionaires that way, but also a lot of
That's funny.
rent increases,
Right.
obviously, right? And so the law changed recently, and my colleague who wanted to do that, who wanted to buy houses
Oh
at
no.
auction that people had been expelled from, like she's
Uh-huh.
which is not a very nice thing to do, but fair enough, it's being sold.
I
And
mean, there's a
yeah,
by the way, and usually that's actually a big headache, because the people who are being foreclosed, or their tenants, they often still live there, and it's difficult to get them evicted. So it's not
that's
as
true.
easy as it sounds either. But because I mean, I was speaking from real life experience. But sorry, you were saying?
Yeah,
She was thinking
she
about
was
doing that.
outraged. She was outraged that this law had been repelled,
Oh
like
no.
this loophole had been repelled. And I told her, like, I understand that this is bad for you as an individual, but surely you can see that this is relatively good for society. And she's like, no, that's terrible because people are making money, which is a good thing and all. And she just wasn't interested in an abstract idea that would not justify her behavior. So I
You
guess
know,
that ties back into what you were saying. Like, it's very difficult to get people to think about things that don't affect them directly, but have to do with
right.
society as a whole, or you know, society in the long term, as you were describing with the Senate problem, for instance.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I was kind of a little bit dismayed, because we were able to talk about, police institutional like racism and all kinds of stuff, and also all theological concepts and stuff like that too. Well, that was minimal, he just asked me and I just told him like, you know, I gave him a very affirming answer. Like, I mean, I didn't want to tell him something dogmatic about Islam, like you had to be a Muslim, but he just asked me about Islam. But you know, even that it ties into the larger discussion we were having about altruism and selfishness. But even at my work, like I don't think anybody thinks about the agency as a whole, and I try to make decisions that way, even though like I'm not really like assigned to. But if something's gonna come back around and like cause more work later, we may as well just like do it correctly the first time. So I just anyway, like I mean, and people they think they're just there to earn a paycheck, and it's hard to well, I mean, part of it's morale, and we were discussing before, I think, and I wanted to maybe add, I think like capitalism kind of destroys this morale because basically if you're just a replaceable peg or like a cog in the machinery, then
And also, if you're paid by the hour, you don't have any stake in working well now to work less later, because an hour of work is an hour of work. What's it to you if it's more work for the enterprise, for the I mean uh, um, the business as a whole?
yeah, exactly. Like, and it's funny because like unions used to own a lot of stock shares, and somehow that like just stopped being a thing in the 80s. And it's funny, newspapers used to have like labor correspondence also, and like that
Hmm.
also like stopped being a thing. But yeah, it's just so different. Like but but even I was thinking like for government workers, who are no, like sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But if they're just people who are tenured and salaried, like they don't have to worry about being fired, because they have a strong union, right? Which is another problem, to be honest with you. Um, like I mean, I may as well talk about it, right? Because I would, but at Rikers, we have a prison called Rikers Island, and the guards are on strike. Because, well, I mean, actually, 30% of them are not showing up to work, claiming they're sick, and they have a generous
Okay.
sick leave policy because they're law enforcement. So their union says, well, it's dangerous, but you're putting your other colleagues at work. So the prisoners are walking freely between the different wards of the prison. It's on an island, so there's like 8 different facilities, and they are beating up other prisoners. They go without weapons checks because the guards know that like if they're by themselves, they can't really, pat down an entire crew with for weapons because they don't have backup
Right.
right now. So and they've gotten the stay-at-home sick rate down to like 25% from 33%. Oh, an inmate found a bus with the ignition still in the keys, and he rammed it into the wall 3 times. So there's like basically there's very little And it's very sad, because the majority of people in that jail are just awaiting trial. They're not even like convicted of anything yet. So, oh, and also like because the facilities have been upgraded, they can pull out a rusty pipe or kick down a wall to attack someone else. Um, it's a
Mm.
very sad thing. But the thing is, though, like because they're unionized, the guards feel free to like not show up. So like you don't want to, and they're against private security coming in to like secure the place. So unions are kind of like I kind of hate them. Being a unionized worker myself, but like you said, I kind of realized I thought of this. Like if you just gave those workers shares in the company, like so to speak, and it's like, well, if there's productivity, the value of your shares go up, but if there's like work behind, then your shares go down. You have to give people a stake in their work, and we don't have that. You're 100% right.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I don't know if I would condemn capitalism for it, because I think it works reasonably well for solving some problems, logistical problems mainly. But
Yeah, I've been agreeing with that actually. Like price is pretty important for
right,
solving scarcity.
well, yeah, I think that when Eastern European societies tried to do without it, like the main problem that cropped up, which is not a small problem, right, was was logistical. Was the like in a planned economy, it is actually very hard to micromanage everything, like and to make it optimize. It is actually an insanely difficult task in a
Insane.
large
Insane.
enough economy, and that's something we kind of take for granted. But because capitalism does it almost naturally, right? I guess you could say it's not optimized, but it's workable. Like it's a basis that you can work from. But where was I going? Yeah, the thing is that an employer and employee and interacting together is like a form of cooperation, right? It's on paper a mutually beneficial relationship, like a contract that both enter because they both need something from each other. I guess this is one way to put it. And so, yeah, if you want to favor the existence of such contracts, you need to make them, you need them to be attractive to both parties, right? So you can't have a system where workers' rights are so extensive and well defended that it is not interesting for a small business to hire people, or it is not interesting for a large business to keep its people into place instead of replacing them with automated tellers, for instance. But it is also not a good idea to have a system that defends the employer's right so well that people live a hellish life if they enter that contract because of the problems of productivity that come with, well, basically amount to slavery and the you know the ossification of society that entails. Because when you have like a majority of people who can't change social classes, then you essentially end up with a caste society, which is, I don't know if it's unsustainable, but it's at least very, very immobile, right? It's very unmoving. Uh, and I would think very non-reactive to crisis and unusual things. It's like, I don't know. I don't think it's a desirable outcome. So I think it's quite obvious that there needs to be like an enforced equilibrium between the interests of the worker and the interests of the employer, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's and that's the important part. This enforced equilibrium is not going to satisfy anyone, because of course if you want to have a semi-capitalistic society like this, of course you're going to have to show up to work and get told what to do, and many people don't like that, right?
Yeah.
And of course you're going to have to pay your workers a minimum wage. And many employers don't like that either, but I don't know. So yeah, it's kind of obvious to me that this can only work if, like, cooperation can only emerge if there is a mutual benefit to be made. So
Yeah.
of course we should enforce a system where the mutual benefit is balanced, right? But this is a terrible platform to be elected, because no one wants a balanced system. Everyone wants a system that is skewed in their favor.
Right. And then the ironic thing becomes, though, like the union becomes its own institution, and institutions are like inherently self-serving. So
Right.
then that becomes its own like power base and its own fiefdom. So it becomes something that's not good for anyone
Yeah, that it
because
becomes a structure of power, like which starts at the smallest. Even with 10 people, you can have a structure of power emerge, and it's going to have very similar mechanisms as a society, as a larger society. Have you seen that video by CGP Grey?
I know the
Which,
channel.
yeah, it's about what's it called again? The rules for rulers. That's what I was
I haven't
thinking
seen it,
about.
but I know about it. Like I've seen the
Right.
trailer. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a few good comments in there, which is that the rules for rulers are about dividing treasury and securing loyalty, essentially. And those rules, well, that's not the whole story, but those rules apply to a president or a dictator, as well as to the smallest president of the local homeowners association. It's like, and he makes that point very well. I thought. So yeah, I recommend it.
What was the rule for the homeowners?
That the way that you stay into place or secure your position is through spending treasury to secure loyalty. That's one of the rules for rulers that he discusses, but it's one of the most, I think, acute. One of the most apt.
Yeah. That's a very deep insight, and that's probably why I could never actually do it. Because like I want to be the one to stop it, but like if you stop it, your
Then
reign is
you,
going to be short and
yeah,
uncelebrated.
yeah. The way he puts it is that wealth that you don't spend on loyalty is wealth that you're uh, that someone else can promise to your supports.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Basically, you're leaving it on the table, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's a very like one thing I was telling my brother because we're passing like giant bills for like infrastructure, but like
Mm-hmm.
they show in all the mafia shows like that on a construction site there's like no show jobs, basically criminal enterprises like they've secured, well, okay, you're the safety manager but you never show up, right? So like or like you're not even expected to be there meetings and stuff. So and it's actually dangerous when it's a safety manager, but either way though, so there's a few jobs that are like ghost jobs, and when you just think about the infrastructure bill, there's certain industries that are just known to be, things fall off the truck kind of industries.
Hmm. I did not know that. I know
Yeah.
that happens in China. Like people selling, that happens because sometimes the bridge breaks, right? So
Hmm.
you know that someone has been selling the good concrete in exchange for cheaper concrete. but well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that it is endemic in Western countries as well.
Yeah, so that's my thing though. It's like if I were to, you know, I think at the end of the day, I do believe in the Platonic Republic kind of thing. And it's very interesting. The U.S. model of government, the Supreme Court
Sorry.
functions.
What do you mean by a Platonic Republic? Like a non-democratic,
Well,
but
a Socratic guardians, like in other words, like we should have philosopher kings that are raised without any personal property, and they can think for the good of like everyone else, and it's
okay.
their job to legislate for us.
Okay. So yeah,
But
the
it's hard.
enlightened despot thing, right?
Yes. But it's hard to run on that platform. It's hard to sell that. It's hard to say who these people will be. Other than myself, of course. But I don't know. It's a very. I mean, it's hard to like pin down. But I think if you raised, like I said, the point is also that these people would be raised from like birth to like not be selfish. Like they would have like communal parents, like in a batch. They would, I mean, and it's funny because like some Marxist experiments communes were run this way because like
Mm-hmm.
the children were batches, like they were and actually some religious cults too as well. Not for nothing, but and I remember like I had a friend from Israel who said that like he had a friend who was raised on a kibbutz, which is a socialist commune, and like you couldn't marry the girl you grew up on the kibbutz with because it was like they were raised almost as siblings. So it would be
Right.
like marrying someone from the same batch.
It was
And so,
icky.
which is very funny, but yeah, I guess like there is a certain, like if you're raised that way. So I'm telling you, it can be done. It has been done. It's not a great idea, but I wouldn't do this for no reason. But I think like there needs to be someone enlightened enough to not have like those kind of ties, unfortunately.
The thing
I think.
is, yeah, I agree with the idea of the philosophical king, right? Of the enlightened ruler, because it solves a lot of problems that emerge with democracies, and it solves a lot of problems that emerge with
Mm-hmm.
totalitarian rulers.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the systemic problem is that someone can only rule with the, like power is not owned, right? It's not, sorry, owned. It's exercised, right? So you can only exercise power if you have, say, a general which will do your bidding, and the general can only exercise power if the captains are doing his bidding, and then the captains can only exercise power if the soldiers will do his bidding. And that's something in a sense,
Mysterious.
yeah, that's like power is not something you just give to someone. It's a heat map, and it's like
Well, I mean,
if you choose the
it's a very keen
philosophical,
insight that you have. Let
like,
me just briefly offer in the
go
show
ahead.
or book, Game of Thrones. They say what is like the crown or like the power that lies behind the crown. It's really 10,000 swords, like probably like or like arrayed across each other across the
Right.
land. So in other words, like you have to, and they're in medieval times, so that's a lot. But basically, we're talking about like every single police force, every single military, gun being counted as part of the general power. I'm talking, I'm an
Yeah,
American.
but also every
Yeah.
single tax collector, every single
Yeah. Yeah.
taxpayer
Yeah. Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. No,
The
of
thing,
course, right. No, but yes. But what I'm saying is, though, it's enforced by like the swords, right, or in our
right?
case,
That's
guns,
true.
right? So, but that's the interest. Anyway, go ahead. You were saying
Um,
I mean, you were saying what is power,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's
I
interesting.
was going. I was
You hit upon the
going
same
to say
point
that.
because you said it went down from like the policeman to the citizen, which I thought was very keen, and the same point that the medieval show makes.
I haven't watched Game of Thrones in a while. Maybe I should. The thing is, in this example, right? If the philosopher king is in power, like who puts him there is the question. If the general of the army puts him there, then the general of the army is in power, in fact, right? And maybe this guy was enlightened enough to decide that we should have an enlightened philosopher king, right? But in this case, why do we need a philosopher king? Like, he might just rule himself and be wise. And I don't know. And if he is anything like you and me, he would probably think that he is the best man for the job as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. And also someone who's become a general is probably someone who's interested in power to begin with.
Yeah.
Actually,
it's very
I
difficult
agree with you that it's the
to-
ideal form of government. My objection is how to get there. Is there an incremental way to, once you've got your philosopher king, how do you put him there? That's the question.
Well, yeah, without answering your question, actually, I wrote down something to speak to that. You know, I remember, like, I'm actually pretty proud of my public school education. And so in elementary school, when you see how it's structured, you know, for me anyway, it's very liberal in the sense that it's like Renaissance Enlightenment. And it's very classical also in that sense, right? Because they admired the classical era. But also it's humanist, medieval, you know, in the sense that there's diverse subjects. And finally, it's also organized like around a lunch period, you know, so like it says leisure time is a part of life. And also I realize like all this school athletics is part of this. I mean, no offense, I'm not against, like, I mean, I read a lot of books as a kid, so like I always thought sports was a waste of time, so I'm a little biased here, you know.
Me
but
too. But I got into it later, but I used to think like
it's
that.
not a bad, yeah, it's not a bad way to spend the time. I'm not against, I mean, it's actually quite interesting. But I'm down to play baseball and all that. But leisure time and how it's managed is a very bourgeois kind of thing. Like, think polo or even water polo or whatnot. But the thing is, though, like that like, I mean, or in our day, golf. Like, we would understand golf as a game that executives play and presidents. But like,
Right.
I've also heard, though, because these people like manage such complex systems and institutions, for them to think across like vast valleys of green and focus on like hitting a little ball and concentrating on it, that is like a really good skill. And also, you know, the long walk between picking up stuff, like, you know, if you have senators or political people, you know, just like playing a game of golf, it's very or CEOs, you can get a lot of business done, you know, that you
It's a
couldn't
social
get
event.
done. Yeah. Or I mean, I'm reminded by this one quote. Mark Twain said, "A golf is nothing but a long walk spoiled." But
This guy had a way with quotes.
yeah, he was great. But you know, like, the thing is, though, like, open skies, open pastures, these things are very conducive to like the human, you know, well-being.
And thinking about long-term goals. Is that what you
Yeah.
were? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that's true. That's why people who manage like large complex institutions play it, because it has like long-term goals in mind, like 18 holes from now. What do I do? And like, you study the course and everything, of course, right? So it's like, that's very interesting. It's like a war almost
Yeah, I guess so.
with your own psyche.
Yeah, you're getting a bit far there.
No, I'm just saying, because, you know, like,
I guess I can see
the immense
business side of it.
concentration like of tennis also, you know, like, there's a lot of physics involved in I mean, in any sport. But when you think about like, anyway, yeah, like, there's a lot of strategy in hitting a ball.
Right.
with your hand?
I guess I do have a bit of an experience of that, because I got into running because of my current job, and running with colleagues is a very social event actually. When not running as in running your lungs out, but a slow jog where you get to
That's
talk to
cool.
your colleagues about stuff like for an hour. Um, it's actually a very social experience.
Yeah, it's better than a conference room.
Yeah, it gets the oxygen flowing, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
but it's
there's
funny
a
though.
social, there's definitely a social and cooperative side to sports. Like even people who play team sports at school, like we used to scoff at. These people are actually learning how to cooperate in a team, and in a sense training for war in a very remote sense, right? That's
Yeah,
the
especially because it's competitive sport. Yeah,
yeah that's I
most high
think
school
that's
sports are competitive. Yeah.
mhm. Those are the instincts that they are yeah that they are using and refining,
Yeah, and
but they don't
colleges
think
see
it
that
in
too. Like
right.
we were thinking like, oh, let's just stay home and watch documentaries or something. But like the colleges are also planning to win tournaments. So they're like, well, who is a good warrior in the swim team? They can be our warrior on our swim team. We can get a few trophies.
Right. While you were reading your book, I was practicing the sword. Something like that.
Yeah, and like you said about the slow jog. I was just reading though, again, like that leisure time, that's a very bourgeois kind of thing. Like running is a sport. I don't think people really like did that. But not to not to attack you and like the
Oh,
the
you can
good
go
time
ahead.
that you had
I'm not
and the
going
good
to
time
you.
that you had with your coworker. But it's very interesting how again though, but like society's become more complex. So we've had to manage our leisure time.
Right. Yeah, I suppose it's entirely true. Like if like if you were a peasant in the 16th century, like you wouldn't see the point of exercising. Like you would already have a probably you would be very
Structure to your
tired at
day.
the end of
Yeah.
the day.
Milk
Yeah,
the cows first thing in the morning,
yeah,
make butter, make bread, clean your
mm,
clothes by hand. All that takes up your day.
right. And even during the off season, what would be the point of going out in the cold and getting fatigued for no reason? Like,
Something really cool. Um, During the pandemic, I got into watches, and specifically like not quartz watches, but like the analog mechanical watches.
mhm,
And so, and I really like this Japanese company, Seiko, but I never heard of it really before. But it's a great brand because it's like affordable and it's on par. But so the Japanese quartz movements kind of like destroyed the Switch watch industry because before it was normal. Like even doormen, they had like a Rolex, in the 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s. Like policemen, they might have had like a Rolex. Like even I went to college around the 2000s, so it's like a Rolex was only like 5,000. It wasn't like 20,000. So like just the way wealth has worked is very funny
right.
in the past 50 or 100 years. So you could, so a normal working class guy could save up, pass a Rolex down to his kids, or her kids. So the the quartz, the invention of quartz destroyed the entire industry that you had for people who just lived on making watches, like companies in the US, companies in Britain, and elsewhere. So but having said that, the Japanese competition, they were always like looked down upon as like inferior timekeepers, but eventually they caught up, because they kept getting better every year in the tournaments. And so even aside from the quartz, the Swiss companies were being outmatched by the Japanese. And so, but the funny thing is though, the Swiss, they, during the winter months as farmers, they became expert watchmakers because they had nothing else to do. So they just like made better and better time keeping devices, like
I
the
did not know that.
beginners. Yeah. And like, so they were the poor, we call them hicks here in the US, just people who are, I mean, it's a pejorative because, you're smearing someone just for coming from a rural area. But anyway, the idea would be is they're uneducated, their accent is very backward country accent. Um, they're again, they're uneducated, therefore they're stupid, right? Like, because you would,
Which is
there's no
the Swiss stereotype in the German-speaking world.
Oh, really?
I'm told. Yeah, they speak like.
I mean, they live in hills, right? So literally, they would be.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
but
part
they
of the
speak a
thing.
very
People from the hills.
peculiar kind of German, which sounds very typically Swiss and isn't like the what they call High German from northern Germany.
That's
even in the name, Well,
the Protestant
anyways.
Reformation. We were speaking mimetic ideas before, and like the printing press, but it's like Zwingli and Calvin were in Geneva. So
yeah, but go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
no, but it's interesting that you're telling me linguistically Geneva is a very different place, and it's like the backwater hills of Germany. And like they also like were champions of this unorthodox theology. It's very interesting because, like, in other words, they just think different, they talk different. It's going to be a different. It's a different epicenter altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. It's kind of cool, actually.
It is. I wonder if Geneva. I'm looking at it.
Like Zurich. Zwingli was killed in Zurich, so that was the capital. But also, like, this is the Holy Roman Empire, so basically, yeah, it is Germany at this point.
Yeah.
So
Zurich is in the German-speaking part of Switzerland, but Geneva is in the French-speaking part of Switzerland.
Yeah, I know it's in cantons.
What I said doesn't apply.
9 different cantons.
Right.
So.
Yeah, but sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you. I don't know what you were talking about before. Watches.
Oh,
and the
watches. Yeah,
the Japanese watches and the Swiss ones.
Swiss ones and how the Japanese caught up. But so that's all. That my point was. It's funny. Like we just like globalization, or like people look at winners and losers. But you can sometimes even look like, okay, well, today's losers, were a dominant industry that was like what's the modern term that all the ads use? What's it called? Supplanted, or like upstart, or like disrupting, right? Disruptors. So like we're disrupting the razor industry, by having like overpriced razors. Okay, great. So but they were the original disruptors, Oh, right. So the Swiss, the French, and the British were the captains of watchmaking. And the Swiss were like the backwater hicks, because it's like, but now, like, obviously tell that to Rolex, tell that to Tudor, tell that to like all the prestigious companies that like they're just so prestigious to have like even one part of theirs labeled as Swiss made counts as like quartz,
I've heard about this story. regarding that, which is probably part of the story as well, which is that a lot of our Swiss making industry in France was in Besançon in southern France, right? Which was a Protestant hotspot during the Reformation. And at some point, I think it was Louis XIV, which issued an order to force them to convert, and a lot of them fled to Switzerland and founded, watch companies there and
Oh
clockmaking
wow,
companies.
wow,
So yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, we learned about Huguenots, the French Protestants too.
right.
In have you read Daniel Dennett?
No, can't say I have.
But do you know who he is?
Isn't he an atheist philosopher or something like that?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I because just on the theme of religion and like what its meaning is. Um, but anyway, were you trying to see something?
No, you are. On the theme of religion and Daniel Dennett.
Daniel Dennett. Okay, but one sec. Okay, I'm just gonna take a quick bathroom break. Okay,
Okay, go ahead.
thanks. Hey,
Hello.
so
Again.
I know it's late where you're at, so I don't want to keep you for too long. But I would like to, I thought of something of my larger point that I wanted to say, and it is that I feel okay. So I think you said before you would think essentially the altruism is a lie. And it's ironic I can't find that other video of the discussion that we did on the other channel. But anyway, the thing is though, but one thing that I appreciated about you is that you didn't blame individual people, as though like they're somehow lazy or there's something wrong with them. You just said though, like if realistically speaking, evolutionary speaking, if you give out free resources, you're going to create a population that takes advantage of that, and then therefore they're going to base their survival based on that free resources without stigmatizing them personally. So I really appreciated that. And then you said basically altruism is based on a lie because obviously nothing is for free. But am I characterizing you correctly?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Well, let me explain to you where I would. This is where I'd be coming from, and I think ironically, evolutionary speaking, every religion has a story. If you look at the story of the Buddha, for example, he was a prince, and he walks away from his kingdom and his wife and children to meditate on the meaning of life, and he like never goes back, and it's kind of like a
Right.
shocking story because like you would think like a system where okay, well, money is important and like money is essential to civilization. Like I remember, there's a film about journalism and broadcast news, and one guy, one journalist just starts railing against the system, and the network executive calls him in his a giant office like a cathedral cavern, and he says that money is the law of gravity, of this planet. So it's like don't think that you can start going up against the system that keeps money in charge. So that being what it is, right? Like, because I'm starting to realize, anyway, like it's very hard to. So, despite that being the law of the, gravity, so to speak, right? Like, basically, resource scarcity has to have a price. Um, it's amazing that the systems that we propagate champion the poor, the beggar, the carpenter, the orphan, and the prince turned mendicant monk, or traveler, or So, and Nietzsche calls this the morality inversion, and he says like somehow the people who are strong, dominant and powerful of society, ruthless, if you will, they become the bad guys when they're most naturally fit to rule, and the weak become exalted. And
Right.
so I know you're not saying poor people are all like vultures, and like they're like the weak, and somehow any kind of pity towards them creates like a race of is bad for the genetic whatever, like I know you're not racializing it in that sense, like there's naturally superior inferior people, but I see two different worldviews, and for me altruism is baked into what my code is. And so for us to have such a polite discussion and to be like, hey, I agree with you, and like I'm laughing it off by the end of the discussion how much we agree. And then I realized like, hey, well, I don't agree with that last thing we just said, which was altruism's a lie. So I feel how does that work again? Where you think altruism, like I mean, because there's self-interested altruism you were saying, right? In
Not
a
all
sense.
instances of altruism are lies, right? Some instances of altruism are authentic, of course, and especially this is true on a
Taking
collective
care of your
level,
offspring.
right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you will, you know, take a collective decision. Well, for instance, what we were discussing in the in the video with President Sunday or with you, right? Authentic, which is real. It's altruism from the general public towards the people that are in need. Um, and sometimes, I suppose, uh, there are authentic acts of altruism in that someone will just freely give up resources to someone else. And also, there is a very important um, aspect of it, which is parental altruism, like parents investing into their children. That is also an instance of authentic altruism, even though I guess you could say it's reproductively selfish. Um, and one last example is the altruism that can happen when your instincts are mismatched with the environment. So, for instance, if you lived in a time of scarcity, um, giving your money, giving some money to, or you know, paying, buying clothes for a woman that you fancy might be a good thing to do because you're advertising wealth and material safety. But if you're
Yeah.
doing that today
Or
in an
like during
environment
wartime,
full
giving extra
judgment, you're just
money, right? Whatever for the collective good, like it's an emergency. So you would understand that a little
yeah,
personal
but it's
sacrifice
also
would be
that
good because it's a greater good.
instincts. I suppose you could, but what I was getting at is that some people do that, use that instinct of, buying up stuff for women that they fancy to donate money on OnlyFans, right? Which is a fruitless pursuit in the modern world. It's an example of a mismatched instinct. Um, so these instances of altruism can happen, but I think you'll find that they are either reproductively selfish, as in the parental altruism example, or they are, in a sense, accidental, right? Your video is lagging behind, so I thought you were talking. All right. So yeah, it's either accidental or reproductively selfish, and to the extent that it's accidental, it is selecting for selfishness as a trait. What you brought up with regards to our cultural myths exalting the value of altruistic people is very interesting. And
Sorry, you broke up a little bit.
it's a very
Oh.
strange thing and something. Yeah, more people would just, idolize. Yeah, you'd that more people would idolize amoral heroes, right? But great civilizational figures are, the poor, the downtrodden, and the very selfless. But I guess I think of them more as myths than real people, even though I believe that Jesus existed and Buddha probably existed too. But the stories and the narratives that we build up around them probably don't have too much in common with what they were really like, which we don't really know, because all that we know comes from either their own description of themselves, right, their self-advocacy, or from their followers. Am I breaking up again? Because you seem to be
No,
talking.
I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. You were saying
Okay.
that
No.
the, what we know about them may be different than what actually happened, which I think is a fairly legitimate criticism. There's a lot of external commentary added to these things for sure, cultural even more than even like individual authors adding their own lines. There's like cultural accretion that we see.
But the
in these
question remains open. Yeah, the question you asked remains open, which is why do we choose such people as models? And that's a fairly interesting question, which I don't have an answer to.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to like jab you in the side with a little bit. Like just think about like, and I think like mimetically, I don't. And you know what it is? I think it's because altruism, like selfishness. I think like we understand like let me pivot to Daniel Dennett. I was talking to him about him just before. Um, but if you think about it, like I think in Christmas, that tradition of giving gifts comes from Yule. And if you live through a very harsh Scandinavian winter, and you bring over like a warm pie to your neighbor, you're saying like, okay, have some nutrients and have some warmth, right? It just ensures survival of the whole community to be a little more altruistic when the weather is bad. And therefore, it becomes like a lucky holiday in a sense. And so, like, by the way, I've read that, like, it's funny, reindeer, they find and look for mushrooms, roots in the ground that are psychedelic because it helps them survive through the harsh winter. Like those are brutal and cold winters that they have in those Arctic, circle zones. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I feel for people, like who and animals who have to live at those temperatures because it's a very unforgiving climate. If you're not ready, then basically, you could like I've seen like I think over the winter like squirrels frozen over, from a sudden cold
Right.
snap. You know, so small mammals don't generate a lot of heat anyway. So it's very easy for them to freeze over. So,
I think the
but
pie thing is an instance of cooperation, not not altruism, right? Because you're not giving a pie, you are storing goodwill, which is very, very valuable if you live in a very hostile
extremely,
environment, such as Scandinavia.
yeah, yeah, you did say that before. So I think um, so yeah, but and I feel like those social graces they kind of keep people a little bit at bay. Otherwise, like like if you just live without them, and I feel like capitalism says like basically I'm not obligated to even say good morning to you or give you a cup of water. Whereas like like for example, in the US we have Amazon that rules everything. I'm just so tempted if I'm home, I would just like to let all the Amazon
Right.
delivery drivers know that they can use my bathroom or whatever. But it's like very hard to like make that happen. But or like I don't know, whatever. But I'm just saying like you can
Yeah.
but it's like cooperation. We have the tools
The
for
the
cooperation
confusion between go
and we don't use them. But go ahead.
right. Yeah, I mean cooperation is everywhere. And we are very well equipped for it. And if you look at it out of context, it does look like altruism, which is probably the reason why people confuse cooperation for altruism all the time. But it's also interesting what you said about people who don't even want to say hello to their neighbors or get to know them, right? Is that those, I mean, some of those right-wing capitalist thinkers have, I think, mostly correctly recognized that altruism doesn't work, but they cooperation for altruism and they reject cooperation as a result, which is absurd. Cooperation is our whole life. It's like like we are cooperative animals most of the time, and it's I don't know. It's an insanely important part of ourselves. It's like society is based on cooperation, on passive cooperation, right? If you just have a group of people without any rules, without any understanding of their common interest, then you just have a group of people or a mob. But as soon as you have passive cooperation in the form of something like the golden rule, or a source of authority that prevents people from committing theft or murder, then you can call that a society. You have established passive cooperation.
Or if they just start trading
Yeah,
amongst
the
themselves with the
ANCAPs,
understanding that like there will be no theft or murder. But yeah, hopefully, right? Like I
right?
mean, at some point it might fall apart. But let's just say, in theory, it could keep going, and that's when the society begins, right? You could have an Eden, right? I'm postulating a utopia here.
Yep.
But yeah, no, you're right. But I agree. That's the moment when society begins. It's when it's like, well, I may not even speak your language, but do you
Right. When
want
the passive cooperation.
this loaf of bread for this sock? Like, yeah, that
Do
works.
you want me to not murder you if you don't murder me? Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I bake some bread. I have some extra, and can you sweep my house for me? Because my back hurts. Or whatever.
Right. And then it's active cooperation. I'm sorry, you said earlier that it was very late here, and I think I'll.
Yes. Thank you so much for
Although we've
having.
talked for quite a while.
Yes, yes, we did. Have a great night. Take care.
Yep. Thank you for being such a. Thank you for being such a genuine and interesting person. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Good day, I suppose.